There's been five element theory for many thousands of years. It's been used through traditional Chinese medicine, and also if you look at some of the ancient sort of medicinal practices, so cold pepper and people like that. So going back into herbalism, those people who are working with plants and nature to be able to restore health and balance to human beings, they've always worked within this sort of very elemental practice. So, looking at elements that are missing, elements that are in excess, elements that are deficient within a living organism as it's showing up its patterns of disease and dysfunction. And so by understanding those aspects and then finding what was required to bring balance into the system, they would be able to do that using herbs, using natural resources, and in traditional Chinese medicine by stimulating specific acupuncture or acupressure points that would bring those qualities back into online and interacting correctly with the other elements. Something and literally this is just today that I've been working with this, and I've been drawing out the five element symbols. And of course, at the moment, because of the things that I'm doing and what I'm looking at in terms of my writing, I'm always thinking about consciousness. And it was interesting in terms of TCM because, of course, the element of air isn't actually expressed in and of itself in the same way that water is, fire is, earth is. So I'd often wondered about that and then sort of thought, well, maybe it sits inside of, or how it might sit inside of either wood or metal. And of course, there is, correlations with metal for air, but it is metal, it's not air. And so that is something that I think, that needs to be held in, in our awareness of that. And so I was working through these five elements, and then this sort of model of placing earth centrally to the sort of pentagram that emerges through the movement of the five elements as they move through this sort of natural cycle. And it became evident to me because something that I'd done just before that was I had been working with this element of air central to the five elements. And of course, traditionally in the five element system, you don't have air in that system. And so I placed it centrally because to me, the aspect of air is it's representative in what is above and what is below. So first of all, when we have a human, the human sits centrally to heaven and earth, and the human is this sort of pivot that is a channel that allows for the energies of heaven and earth to merge within the human being and to express this duality within the individual human self. And therefore we hold within us this dynamic exchange that is occurring between what we receive from above and our heavenly aspect and what we are receiving from the earth and that earthly aspect. And we are the balance between those two polar positions. And so it's the human being that balances those two aspects. And so I had been drawing this out, and in terms of the energy centres and the elements as they're sort of interacting. And And it just made complete sense to me that the element of air was the counterbalance to earth. It was in pole opposition. And so in my schema, whilst the human is sitting upon the earth, then there's also this energetic of ether and air which comes from above. And so this sort of open channel that happens between these two. So I placed air inside of the central pentagram that represents the 5 elements. And then something really interesting happened, and I became aware that this particular cycle, and it shifted position. I had to shift the position of where in TCM, where the naturally where the 5 elements are placed. So I shifted the position so that air was central, and that earth was, if you like, in my schema that I created, was the top first movement from air. So and this aspect of air representing consciousness, this aspect of mind, and that it's this aspect of mind that's held within air, this dynamic, moving, heavenly energy that is non-physical, and just embodies this whole expression of the mind. And so something really interesting happened, and I went through and followed through this progression of consciousness as it emerges and moves through that cycle of the 5 elements. And it made complete sense in its dynamic and its movement and its cycle. And then I thought, this doesn't sit in a normal 5 element pattern or cycle. So I wanted to come back to that. So I moved back from there to placing earth at the centre of that 5 element creative cycle. And of course, what I recognised there was, with earth sitting centrally, and then fire being, if you like, the first movement into the 5 elements from earth being the central point of that cycle, then it was very clear that what we had was a cycle of human form, of biology, of of the earth being that aspect which is which creates form, and therefore forms our being human and our human form, and the expression of that through the physical realm, through physicality. And so that made complete sense to me, that as a model, this is our TCM, our traditional Chinese model, because whilst we are working with all of these elements, and whilst we're working with emotion, mind, body, spirit, we're doing that through the experience and expression of the human form, the physical human being. So that makes complete sense that that is that's the cycle. But I thought how interesting it was that in juxtaposition to the 5 element that I had created, that had air and consciousness and mind as the central premise for the rest of the evolution, if you like, of the cycle, and how this created a different type of experience, a different type of expression of each of those individual 5 elements, and how their characteristics or what they do showed up differently in that cycle to this other cycle. And that being that one was holding mind, centrally, and the other was holding, you know, mind as in air, and the other was holding the earth as the central sort of point of the cycle.